Welcome to On the Vineyard, a weekly podcast from the Vineyard Gazette Media Group on Martha's Vineyard. I'm publisher Monica Brady-Meyerov. We're so glad you're here. On the Vineyard is sponsored by Crane Appliance. Labor Day weekend was full of visitors and summer residents soaking up the last of the summer. The weather was glorious. The Gray Barn Farms sold-out Goodbye Cookout was the place to be if you could score a ticket. If you didn't score a ticket, a beach picnic with the last of their bread and award-winning cheese would have sufficed. Now the kids are back in school, and the Islands High School has won its first approval hurdle for a big renovation and addition.
The school building committee met this week, actually, and they voted on a size cap.
More on that later in the show. Today, another island institution celebrates a milestone. Morning Glory is celebrating its 50th anniversary with live music, fresh corn, and local food at its second annual Corn Shuck and Shimmy. The Gazette did a really nice story about the history of the farm. When they started out in 1975, they had only one cow. They sold milk to the neighbors, and they grew a half acre of sweet corn. Now it's a year-round bounty of produce from its fields and sourced from around the world. That's the sound of the historic press in the Vineyard Gazette offices in Eggertown printing the paper. That means it's time to go upstairs to the newsroom and check in with Bill Evell, the editor-in-chief, and the reporters on this week's news.
Now turning to the high school, Louisa Huffstadter has the story this week on the ongoing school rebuilding project, which has been in the planning stages and taking small steps here and there, but took a big step this week. Louisa?
Yes, Bill. Last week, the high school building project received the unanimous support of the Board of Directors of the Massachusetts School Building Authority, which stands ready to reimburse a very significant chunk of the hundreds of millions of dollars it will cost to renovate and extend our rather aged high school.
Yeah, and so when this began, there was talk about, are you going to do a whole new school? Are you going to do addition? Are you going to do this or that, the other thing? So now we really have sort of a pretty good plan going forward, correct?
Yes, they are refining the design that was approved by the state authority. They've gotten it down. The school building committee met this week, actually, and they voted on a size cap. The current school is 165,000 square feet. The latest design approved by the state was 211,000 square feet, and they've now got a firm cap of 199,900 square feet for the high school project.
So the designs keep shifting and the plans keep shifting, but is there sort of a vague understanding of what this might cost?
Yes, we are down from an estimate that was over $400 million, I believe, last year. The most recent estimate, which was for the larger 211,000 square foot project, was roughly $334 million, not including reimbursements from the state. With those reimbursements deducted, it's estimated to cost the island between $220 and $270 million. When we're talking about money from the state for the high school construction project, this money comes from sales taxes. It does not come from property taxes or any sort of statutory burden on residents. It comes straight out of the sales tax charged on most retail purchases in Massachusetts. So that's where that money comes from, and they will reimburse up to a little bit more than 38% on a lot of the costs.
The other non-reimbursable costs, they're not done through sales taxes. They'll be done through other ways. And there's a kind of a couple of possibilities of how to vote on this project.
This is expected to take place at next spring's annual town meetings in each of our 6 towns on Martha's Vineyard. And presuming that most of these towns will need to also have a debt exclusion because the amount that's going to be borrowed will be so high, even shared among the 6 towns, that'll also involve 6 individual town votes at the ballot box. So 12 votes potentially in all to make this happen. A second possibility exists under state law, and that is something called a district-wide election, which can be called at the sole discretion of the high school committee for a single election on one day in all 6 island towns run by the town clerks, and all that would take to pass the borrowing measure under those circumstances would be a majority counted without regard to municipal boundaries. It's unprecedented here to do that district vote, but it has been practiced on the mainland, and I believe it's also stood up to court review.
All right. Okay, so that is a mouthful. This story will continue all year long, and we'll keep following it. Thanks so much, Louisa.
Thank you, Bill.
Turning now to Addison Antonoff, who has a really cool history story. It involves the Cottage City Star. Any of you out there read that? Probably not. It was published from 1879 to 1885. It has been available on microfilm at the Edgartown Library, but thanks to a new digitization project, one can get it with just a click on the internet. But Addison, take us back to this newspaper, how it started, what it was.
Yeah, so it takes us back to me, the most famous rivalry on the island, which is Edgartown and Oak Bluffs, because back in 1879, Oak Bluffs was not a town yet. It wasn't Cottage City. It was northern Edgartown. And at the time, it had started to become financially very successful. Edgartown, which originally got a lot of its money through whaling, was going through a bit of a low point because the whaling industry was flailing. And so northern Edgartown, what becomes Cottage City, and then Oak Bluffs, was booming through the resort industry. You know, all these hotels were popping up. People were coming and vacationing. It was kind of the start of that time in Martha's Vineyard. And as what becomes Oak Bluffs becomes increasingly more financially successful, they wanted to be getting more benefits from the town of Edgartown as a whole. Edgartown had voted on a couple things that Oak Bluffs wasn't happy with, so they started trying to secede. It wasn't going very well. They petitioned the State House about 3 times. So a group of secessionists decide, in order to help garner support, they're going to start a newspaper that's in part rival to the Vineyard Gazette. We have seen how that fight ended up.
We won.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. So this group of secessionists, one of them is Hans Norris, start this Vineyard Publishing Association. They buy a printing press, and they begin the Cottage City Star.
It really is such a snapshot of that time because the Gazette, although I just called out that we won the ultimate battle, back then we weren't that local. We really sort of culled a lot of stories from newspapers around the country, but the Cottage City Star was hyper-local.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spoke to Bo Van Riper, who is a research librarian over at the Martha's Vineyard Museum. And so the Gazette, in addition to a lot of newspapers, was common at the time, published a lot of stories that we'd call boilerplate, so these national interest stories. Cottage City Star did publish some things that were national. They published poetry as well. But they also did a lot of local reporting. So there's a couple of things where the Cottage City Star has a lot of information. There was a fire that razed Main Street in Vineyard Haven, and almost everything that we know about that fire from 1883 comes from the Cottage City Star because there was so much local reporting.
Yeah, and it was successful in its mission because Cottage City did become Oak Bluffs, its own town.
Yes, Cottage City gets incorporated in 1880, but it didn't exist very long. But in that brief period, they were very opinionated about what was going on the island.
Yeah, it existed for a few more years to 1885 and then was swallowed up, correct?
Yes, it existed until 1885, and then it was bought up and became the Martha's Vineyard Herald.
Which then was bought up by the Vineyard Gazette. And here we are today. All right, Addison, thank you so much for that story. Check out her story, and then also check out the Cottage City Star.
You can read more on these stories and all the news for free at vineyardgazette.com, and you can subscribe to the weekly paper and have it delivered to you anywhere in the country or world. Now, what's coming up? Featherstone's Potter's Bowl is this Sunday. The way it works is you pay $40 for a handcrafted ceramic bowl, and you get it filled with homemade soup. The proceeds support the Art Center. This is super popular. I tried to go last year, but was shocked by the huge line when the event opened, so get there early. Also on Sunday, the Martha's Vineyard Museum is holding a late summer picnic to say goodbye to the amazing Jaws exhibit. The museum had a record 20,000 guests visit the exhibit over about 3 months. Sadly, it closes on Sunday. If you want more stories about Jaws, like I do, I recommend listening to WBUR's new podcast, Jaws Island. It really captures how Jaws forever changed the vineyard. It's produced by my old colleague, Andrea Shea at WBUR, where I worked as a reporter for about 15 years. I'm in episode 2 talking about the Jaws 20th anniversary magazine the Gazette published to showcase new photos and stories from the filming. You can buy a magazine online at the Vineyard Gazette store. Bo Van Riper, the museum's research librarian, is in the podcast too, talking about how the authenticity of Jaws was so important to the success of the movie.
the fact that they're using a real converted lobster boat for the orca, the fact that they're really shooting it out in the Atlantic absolutely comes through, and I think is part of the reason why, even in an age of computer-generated special effects, it still feels suspenseful, engrossing, and scary.
Listen to Jaws Island wherever you get your podcasts. And that's also where you'll find On the Vineyard. So please tell a friend who loves the Vineyard about both podcasts. This week, the Vineyard says goodbye to Jim Thomas.
Oh, wasn't that a white river?
Thomas died in March at the age of 86. He created the U.S. Slave Song Project's Spiritual Choir to preserve and spread traditional slave songs in 2005, after he was asked to direct a gospel choir at the Martha's Vineyard NAACP. On August 28th, the Island Singers gathered to pay tribute to Thomas at the Martha's Vineyard Museum.
It joyed the earth and it shook the sky. One more river to cross. Oh,
this audio was recorded by TourStaffordVA.com in 2014 when Thomas spoke and performed in Stafford, Virginia, where he was born. Our theme music is from Island composer and musician Michael Hayden. Thanks to our sponsor, Crane Appliance. When you shop at Crane Appliance, you get their appliance expertise, very competitive pricing, and service after the sale should you need it. Crane Appliance. They call the Cape and Islands home. I'm Monica Brady-Myrov. Thanks for joining us on The Vineyard. Talk to you next week.